My sister, Sarah, always seemed to glide through life, effortlessly beautiful, charming everyone she met. I, on the other hand, was the quiet observer, the one who saw the cracks beneath the polished surface. For years I believed in her, defended her, even when she chose men who were clearly wrong for her. Then came Mark. From the moment he entered her life, a cold dread settled in my stomach. He was charming, yes, but there was an unsettling possessiveness in his eyes, a flicker of something dark whenever Sarah wasn't looking. I tried to warn her gently at first, then with increasing urgency, but she dismissed my concerns as jealousy, a common refrain in our strained relationship. She accused me of being unable to see her happy, of always finding fault. I watched, powerless, as she slipped further into his orbit, her laughter becoming less genuine, her eyes losing their spark. The night everything shattered is etched into my memory with painful clarity. It was Sarah's 35th birthday, a small gathering at her place in upstate New York. I remember the scent of lilac from her garden, the clinking of glasses, the forced cheer. Mark, fueled by too many bourbons, started a petty argument with Sarah, his voice rising, his words laced with venom. I saw the fear in her eyes, a raw primal terror that made my blood run cold. Before I could even react, he grabbed her, his hand clamping around her arm, twisting it with brutal force. A collective gasp filled the room. Then, a sickening crack. Sarah screamed, a sound that still haunts my nightmares. My heart hammered against my ribs. Without thinking, I lunged forward, pushing Mark away from her. He stumbled, his eyes blazing with a terrifying rage, and then he was on me. The impact sent me flying, my head hitting the antique grandfather clock with a deafening thud. Pain exploded behind my eyes, and the world spun into a dizzying kaleidoscope of color before fading to black. When I woke, the house was silent, eerily so. A throbbing ache in my skull was my only companion. I pushed myself up, my vision blurry, my body screaming in protest. Sarah was gone. Mark was gone. Only a note, hastily scribbled on a napkin, remained on the kitchen counter. "I'm leaving with Mark, don't look for me." This is for the best. My own sister, the one I had just tried to protect, had abandoned me, leaving me bruised, battered, and utterly alone. The resentment that had simmered for years ignited into a raging inferno. How could she? How could she choose him over me, after everything? The betrayal cut deeper than any physical wound. It wasn't just the physical attack, it was the chilling realization that she valued a man who hurt her more than she valued her own sister. Days bled into weeks. The police investigation went nowhere, hindered by Sarah's disappearance and her refusal to cooperate. I was left to pick up the pieces of my shattered life, my mind consumed by a single burning question. Why? Why did she leave me there? Why did she choose to run with the very man who had assaulted us both? The obsession began subtly, a nagging thought, then a relentless pursuit. I couldn't sleep, couldn't eat. Every waking moment was spent replaying that night, searching for clues, for answers. I started digging, sifting through old photos, emails, social media posts. I spoke to old friends, former colleagues, anyone who might shed light on Mark's past, on Sarah's sudden drastic decision. The more I unearthed, the more chilling the picture became. Mark wasn't just a controlling boyfriend, he had a history, a dark, manipulative past that Sarah had been completely blind to. But then, tucked away in an old jewelry box, a discovery sent shivers down my spine. It was a faded photograph, not of Sarah and Mark, but of Mark and another woman, a woman who looked eerily familiar. And beneath it, a tiny, almost imperceptible inscription, a date and a name. A name that would change everything I thought I knew about my sister's disappearance, and reveal a truth far more sinister than I could ever have imagined. What I found wasn't just about Mark, it was about Sarah, and a secret she had been keeping for years, a secret that bound her to Mark in a way I couldn't comprehend. And it would lead me down a path of no return, where justice would become my sole unwavering purpose. My name is Elias, and for a long time my life revolved around two things: my sister, Clara, and the suffocating secret she kept. We grew up in a small, tight-knit community in rural Ohio, where everyone knew everyone else's business, or at least they thought they did. Our parents, hardworking and devout, had instilled in us a strong sense of family loyalty, a bond that I believed was unbreakable. Clara, 3 years older than me, was my protector, my confidant, and my best friend. We shared everything, from scraped knees to teenage heartbreaks, and I trusted her more than anyone in the world. Then came Liam. He strode into Clara's life like a summer storm, all bluster and charm, sweeping her off her feet with grand gestures and promises. He was a traveling salesman, always on the road, which meant he was rarely around our small town. At first, I was wary. There was something in his eyes, a glint of something cold and calculating, that unsettled me. Clara, however, was completely smitten. She saw only his charisma, his ambition, and the exciting life he painted for their future. Within 6 months, they were engaged, and Clara was planning a dream wedding, convinced she had found her soulmate. My unease grew with each passing week. Liam's charm, I soon realized, was a carefully constructed facade. I started noticing the subtle shifts in Clara's demeanor after he visited. Her vibrant energy would dim, replaced by a quiet nervousness. She'd flinch at sudden movements, and her once sparkling eyes often held a distant, troubled look. Whenever I pressed her, she'd brush it off, attributing it to wedding stress or just her being tired. But I knew my sister, and this was more than just pre-wedding jitters. The knot of fear in my stomach tightened with every dismissive wave of her hand. One sweltering August afternoon, my worst fears materialized. I had gone over to Clara's house, a small bungalow she'd bought with her savings, to help her with some wedding invitations. The front door was ajar, and I heard raised voices, Liam's booming and Clara's a terrified whisper. My heart hammered against my ribs. I froze in the entryway, the elegant invitation card still clutched in my hand, as I listened to Liam's menacing tone. He was berating her, his words laced with venom, accusing her of things I couldn't quite make out. Then came the sound that would forever echo in my memory, a sharp, sickening thud, followed by Clara's choked cry. Pure adrenaline surged through me. I burst into the living room, my vision narrowing to a red haze. Liam stood over Clara, who was crumpled on the floor, clutching her arm, tears streaming down her face. His face was contorted with rage, his hand still raised as if to strike again. The air crackled with a terrifying intensity. He spun around, his eyes locking onto mine, and for a split second, I saw pure, unadulterated malice. He was no longer the charming fiancé, he was a monster. "Get out," he snarled, his voice a low growl that sent shivers down my spine. "This is none of your business, Elias." I stood my ground, my fists clenched, my entire body trembling with a mixture of fear and fury. "What did you do to her?" I demanded, my voice barely a whisper, but filled with an intensity that surprised even myself. Clara, still on the floor, looked up at me, her eyes wide with terror. "Elias, please," she pleaded, her voice cracking. "Just go." Her plea, rather than calming me, ignited a fresh spark of anger. How could she defend him? How could she endure this? I wanted to rush forward, to tear Liam apart with my bare hands, but a part of me, a small, rational part, knew I was outmatched. Liam was bigger, stronger, and clearly unhinged. I was just Elias, her younger brother. He took a step towards me, his eyes blazing, and I braced myself for impact. But then Clara, with a strength I didn't know she possessed, scrambled to her feet and positioned herself between us. "Stop it, both of you," she cried, her voice strained. "Elias, just leave. I'll handle this." The betrayal in her words hit me harder than any physical blow. She was choosing him. She was choosing to protect her abuser over her own brother. My anger morphed into a searing pain, a wound that went deeper than any I had ever known. I looked at Clara, truly looked at her, and saw a stranger. The sister I knew, the one who would always stand by me, was gone, replaced by a shell of a woman consumed by fear and denial. My mind raced, grappling with the scene before me. My sister, Clara, bruised and broken, yet still shielding the man who hurt her. The reality of it slammed into me with the force of a physical blow. This wasn't just an argument, it was something far more sinister. This was abuse, and Clara was trapped. And yet, she was pushing me away, telling me to leave. The sheer helplessness of the situation was suffocating. I felt a cold dread seep into my bones, a premonition of the dark path that lay ahead. This wasn't just about Liam anymore. It was about Clara, about her choices, and about the deep, festering wound that had just been torn open between us. My world, once anchored by our shared bond, was now adrift in a sea of resentment and confusion. The sting of Clara's betrayal was a physical ache, a raw wound festering beneath my skin. I returned to my own small apartment, the silence amplifying the thunderous questions in my mind. How could she? How could the sister who swore we'd always have each other, the one who knew my deepest fears and shared my wildest dreams, turn her back on me so completely? The image of her face, hard and unyielding as she dismissed my pleas, replayed endlessly. It wasn't just the physical violence Liam inflicted that night. It was the way Clara chose him over me, over our history, over everything we'd ever been. That was the true blow, the one that shattered my perception of our unbreakable bond. Sleep became a stranger. My nights were a restless cycle of anger and confusion, each thought a jagged shard tearing at my peace. I tried to reach out to her, sending texts that went unanswered, leaving voicemails that were never returned. Every attempt felt like shouting into a void, the silence on the other end deafening. Our parents, bless their hearts, were caught in the middle, their attempts to mediate met with Clara's stone wall of defiance. She told them I was being dramatic, that I was trying to sabotage her happiness. It was a calculated lie, designed to isolate me further, and it worked. Their well-meaning advice, urging me to let it go for the sake of family, only fueled my resentment. They couldn't see, or perhaps refused to see, the true depth of the chasm that had opened. Weeks bled into months. The wedding date loomed, a stark reminder of the life Clara was eagerly building, a life that excluded me entirely. I heard snippets from mutual acquaintances. Clara was glowing, planning every detail with Liam, seemingly oblivious to the wreckage she'd left in her wake. Each report was a fresh stab, reinforcing the feeling that I was not just cast aside but erased. The sister I knew, the one who would have fought tooth and nail for me, was gone, replaced by this cold, unrecognizable stranger. This wasn't just a disagreement, it was an act of profound abandonment, and the pain of it was a constant gnawing presence. Then came the invitation, a thick, embossed card, arriving in my mailbox like a cruel joke. It was for Clara's wedding. My hands trembled as I held it, the elegant script mocking my turmoil. Liam's name was etched beside hers, a stark reminder of the man who had driven a wedge between us, the man Clara had chosen. The audacity of it, to invite me to witness her union with the very person who had fractured our family, was astounding. It wasn't an olive branch, it was a gauntlet thrown, a final declaration of her allegiance. A new emotion began to simmer beneath the surface of my grief, a quiet, determined anger. I stared at the invitation, the elegant paper feeling like sandpaper against my fingertips. This wasn't just about Clara's happiness anymore. It was about the truth. It was about the injustice. Liam was a predator, and Clara, in her blindness, was enabling him. I couldn't stand by and watch her walk into a life built on deceit and violence. The thought of her, my sister, being manipulated and potentially harmed, ignited a protective fire within me that had been dormant since that terrible night. I started digging. Not openly, not in a way that would tip off Clara or Liam. I began with discreet online searches, looking for any mention of Liam's past, anything that might explain the darkness I'd seen in his eyes. His social media was meticulously curated, a perfect facade of success and charm. But I knew that true shadows often lurked in the corners, in the unsaid, in the people he'd left behind. I contacted old friends of Clara's, people she'd drifted away from since Liam entered her life. They were hesitant at first, sensing the unspoken tension, but eventually, some offered small, seemingly insignificant details. One mentioned a previous engagement that had ended abruptly, another a string of short-term jobs in different states. Each piece of information, no matter how small, felt like a breadcrumb leading me down a dark, winding path. The more I uncovered, the more a chilling pattern began to emerge. Liam's past was a patchwork of brief appearances and sudden disappearances, always leaving behind a trail of unanswered questions, and sometimes whispers of trouble. There were no concrete accusations, nothing that would hold up in court, but the consistency of the narrative was unsettling. He was a man who seemed to reinvent himself with alarming frequency, shedding past lives like old skin. The charisma Clara found so captivating was a tool, I realized, a carefully honed weapon designed to disarm and control. My investigation became an obsession. I spent countless hours poring over public records, cross-referencing names, and searching obscure online forums. The feeling that I was uncovering something significant, something dangerous, grew with each passing day. It was a desperate race against time, against the inevitable wedding day, to find the proof I needed, not just for myself, but for Clara. I had to expose Liam, not just for the pain he'd caused me, but for the danger he posed to my sister, even if she refused to see it. The resentment I felt towards Clara was still a bitter taste in my mouth, but beneath it, a fierce determination had taken root. I would not let her make a catastrophic mistake, not without a fight. My focus narrowed, sharpening into a single unyielding point, Liam. I would unmask him, no matter the cost. My resolve solidified into something cold and sharp, a weapon I was forging in the fires of my anger and fear for Clara. I knew I couldn't confront Liam directly. He was too cunning, too practiced in manipulation. He'd simply twist my words, turn Clara against me even further, and tighten his hold. My approach had to be surgical, methodical. I needed to find the cracks in his perfect facade, the hidden truths he so desperately guarded. This wasn't about revenge, not yet anyway. It was about exposing him, about shattering the illusion he'd built around my sister before it was too late. My investigation began subtly, almost imperceptibly. I started with his online presence, something Clara had always dismissed as unimportant. Liam claimed he wasn't a social media person, a convenient excuse I now realized. He had a LinkedIn profile, meticulously curated, showcasing a stellar career trajectory in sales. But the details were sparse, almost generic. No photos with family, no long-term connections, just a string of impressive-sounding job titles and glowing, yet vague, recommendations. It was too clean, too polished, like a brochure rather than a real person's life. I cross-referenced his listed companies, digging through old news articles and financial reports. A few of them had suspiciously high turnover rates for their sales teams, and one had even faced a class action lawsuit from former employees alleging wage theft and harassment. Liam's name wasn't explicitly mentioned, but the timing of his employment aligned perfectly with the company's troubles. A pattern began to emerge, a faint outline of someone who left a trail of disruption in his wake. Next, I turned my attention to his past relationships, a task made infinitely harder by his transient lifestyle. Clara had mentioned he'd been engaged once before, but the woman had ghosted him, according to Liam, leaving him heartbroken. That story, I now understood, was a red flag the size of Texas. People don't just vanish without a trace, especially not after an engagement. I started searching public records, local news archives, anything that might link Liam to a previous address or a former partner. It was like searching for a needle in a haystack, but the image of Clara's bruised arm fueled my determination. I spent countless late nights hunched over my laptop, coffee growing cold beside me, sifting through digital crumbs. My sleep suffered, my appetite vanished, but I couldn't stop. The thought of Clara marrying this man, living under his control, was a constant gnawing pain in my chest. Then, a breakthrough. A small local newspaper article from a town in central Pennsylvania, buried deep in an online archive, caught my eye. It was a brief piece about a domestic disturbance, a restraining order filed by a woman named Sarah Jenkins against a traveling salesman who fit Liam's general description. The article didn't name Liam directly, citing privacy concerns, but the details were too specific to be a coincidence. Sarah had accused her ex-fiancé of emotional abuse, financial manipulation, and physical intimidation. The article mentioned a specific incident involving a shattered picture frame and a threat to her family. My blood ran cold. This wasn't just a similar story, it felt like a blueprint. The woman, Sarah, had eventually dropped the restraining order, the article concluded, and had moved away, disappearing without a trace. Just like Clara's ghosting story, the parallels were chilling. Liam's modus operandi was becoming sickeningly clear. He preyed on vulnerable women who were perhaps a little too trusting, a little too eager for love and stability. He'd charm them, isolate them, and then slowly, systematically, dismantle their lives. And when they finally tried to escape, he'd make them disappear, either physically or by crushing their spirit until they had no fight left. My heart pounded with a mixture of terror and a fierce, burning rage. Clara was next. She was walking straight into the same trap, blinded by a love that wasn't real, a future that was nothing but a cruel mirage. I tried to reach out to Sarah Jenkins. It took weeks of painstaking detective work, sifting through old phone books, cross-referencing names, and even using a private investigator database I found online. Each dead end was a fresh wave of frustration, but I refused to give up. Finally, I found a possible lead, a distant relative of Sarah's, a cousin who still lived in the same Pennsylvania town. I composed a careful, anonymous email, explaining my situation in broad strokes, asking if they knew anything about Sarah or her past. I didn't mention Liam by name, fearing it might spook them, but I described the pattern of abuse, the sudden disappearance, the broken engagement. I waited, my stomach in knots, for a reply that might never come. Days turned into a week, then 2. I was losing hope, feeling the crushing weight of my efforts yield nothing. Then, one evening, an email appeared in my inbox. The subject line was simply Sarah. My hands trembled as I opened it. It was from the cousin, a woman named Emily. She had recognized the description immediately. Sarah, she wrote, had indeed been through a terrible ordeal with a man named Liam. Emily confirmed every detail from the newspaper article and added more, far more disturbing accounts of Liam's escalating abuse. He had systematically drained Sarah's bank accounts, isolated her from her friends, and constantly belittled her. The physical violence had started subtly, a shove here, a grab there, before escalating to outright attacks. Sarah had finally escaped in the dead of night, fleeing the state and changing her name. Terrified that Liam would find her, she was still living in fear, even years later. Emily's email ended with a warning. Liam was a dangerous man, a master manipulator who left a trail of broken lives in his wake. She urged me to protect Clara at all costs, to help her see the truth before it was too late. The email was a gut punch, confirming my deepest fears and solidifying my resolve. I had found my evidence, the proof I needed to unmask Liam. But the question remained, how could I make Clara believe me? How could I shatter the illusion she so desperately clung to without destroying her in the process? The path ahead was fraught with peril, but I knew with absolute certainty that I would not, let my sister become another one of Liam's victims. This was no longer just about exposing him. It was about saving Clara, even if she didn't want to be saved. My resolve hardened, each beat of my heart echoing a silent vow. I would save Clara. The immediate challenge was finding irrefutable proof, something that would shatter Liam's carefully constructed facade and force Clara to see the truth. I couldn't just accuse him, she would never believe me. I needed evidence, cold, hard facts that even her love-blinded eyes couldn't ignore. My investigation began subtly, almost imperceptibly. I started with his claims of being a success. Traveling salesman. A quick search of the Secretary of State's business registry for his supposed company yielded nothing. No records, no licenses, no legitimate business operations. This was the first crack in his story, a small but significant detail. Then I delved deeper into his past. Liam was always cagey about his family, his hometown, anything before he met Clara. He'd offer vague anecdotes, carefully curated tales that sounded just a little too perfect. I spent countless nights poring over public records, old newspaper archives, and social media deep dives, searching for any trace of the real Liam. It was like looking for a ghost. He seemed to have materialized out of thin air just a few years prior. The more I searched, the more questions arose, each unanswered inquiry a brick in the wall of my growing suspicion. This wasn't just a bad guy. This was someone actively hiding something. Someone with a past they desperately wanted to bury. The turning point came when I stumbled upon an old, almost forgotten local news article from a small town in rural Kentucky, far from where Liam claimed to be from. The headline was innocuous enough: local woman reports missing engagement ring. The story detailed a woman, Sarah Jenkins, who had recently broken off an engagement and subsequently discovered her valuable family heirloom ring was gone. What caught my eye wasn't just the missing ring, but the description of the ex-fiancé, a charming, charismatic salesman who had swept her off her feet, then vanished without a trace after the breakup. The physical description in the article, though generic, stirred a chilling familiarity. A name was mentioned, a common enough name, but the article also referenced his distinctive, silver-tongued way of speaking and his unusual talent for making people feel utterly captivated. It was Liam. It had to be. The hairs on my arms stood on end. This wasn't just a coincidence. This was a pattern. My hands trembled as I dug deeper into Sarah Jenkins's story. I found her old social media profiles, still active but dormant. A picture of her and her former fiancé popped up. My breath caught in my throat. It was unmistakably Liam, younger, with a slightly different hairstyle, but the same cold glint in his eyes, the same predatory smile. The realization hit me like a physical blow. Clara wasn't just engaged to a bad man. She was engaged to a con artist, a predator who had done this before. The anger that surged through me was unlike anything I had ever felt. It was a raw, primal rage, fueled by the image of Clara's trusting face, the memories of her quiet sadness, and the terrifying thought of what else Liam was capable of. He wasn't just emotionally abusive, he was a thief, a liar, and God knows what else. My investigation shifted from cautious probing to relentless pursuit. I reached out to Sarah Jenkins through a burner email account, carefully crafting a message that would sound empathetic but not alarming. I needed her story, her experience, to piece together the full extent of Liam's deception. Her reply came surprisingly quickly, a torrent of pain and warning. Sarah confirmed everything. The charm, the grand promises, the isolation, the subtle emotional manipulation, and finally, the theft of her grandmother's diamond ring. She described him as a chameleon, adapting his personality to perfectly fit his target. He'd prey on women who were vulnerable, lonely, or just looking for love, then systematically strip them of their resources and their self-worth. Sarah's words painted a horrifying picture of a man who saw relationships as transactions, a means to an end. She warned me that he was dangerous, not just financially, but emotionally. He would break Clara down, make her question her own sanity, before leaving her with nothing. The urgency of my mission intensified. I now had concrete evidence, a witness, and a clear understanding of Liam's modus operandi. This wasn't just about saving Clara from a bad marriage, it was about saving her from a professional predator. The next step was the hardest, confronting Clara. How do you tell someone the person they love, the person they're about to marry, is a manipulative con artist who has systematically stolen from others? How do you shatter their world without destroying them in the process? I knew it would be a painful conversation, a battle against her own denial, but I also knew I couldn't back down. Not now, not ever. Clara's future, her very safety depended on it. I meticulously gathered all my evidence, printing out articles, screenshots of social media, and that changed everything. Sarah's harrowing emails. I knew I had one shot, and I had to make it count. The weight of this secret, this truth, was crushing, but the thought of Clara unknowingly walking into a trap was far worse. The day arrived, stark and unforgiving. I had arranged a meeting with Clara, ostensibly to finalize some details for the wedding. My heart hammered a frantic rhythm against my ribs as I drove to her house. This wasn't just about stopping a wedding. This was about saving my sister, about tearing down the carefully constructed fantasy Liam had built around her. I parked down the street, taking a moment to compose myself, the envelope heavy on the passenger seat beside me. It contained not just Sarah's story, but the damning evidence of Liam's history, a history Clara deserved to know. Clara greeted me at the door, her smile a little too bright, her eyes still holding that subtle shadow I'd grown to dread. She led me to the kitchen, a space usually filled with laughter and the scent of her baking, but today it felt charged with an unspoken tension. We sat across from each other at the small, round table, the silence stretching between us like a fragile thread. I watched her, really watched her, and saw the weariness etched around her eyes, the way her hands trembled slightly as she poured us iced tea. This wasn't the vibrant, confident Clara I knew. This was a woman on the precipice of something terrible. "Clara," I began, my voice steadier than I expected, "we need to talk, truly talk, about Liam." Her shoulders stiffened almost imperceptibly. She started to speak, to deflect, to offer another excuse, but I cut her off gently. "No, please. Just listen. I have something important to show you." I pushed the thick envelope across the table. Her brow furrowed in confusion, then annoyance, as she picked it up. As she pulled out the stack of papers, her expression shifted. The articles detailing Liam's past arrests, the restraining orders, the accusations of fraud, each one a hammer blow to the image she held of him. Her eyes widened, scanning the dates, the names, the chilling details. Then came Sarah's emails. The raw, emotional accounts of manipulation, abuse, and financial ruin. Clara's breath hitched. Her face, usually so expressive, became a mask of disbelief, then dawning horror. "What is this, Elias?" Her voice was barely a whisper, laced with a tremor I'd never heard before. "This isn't real. This is a lie." She looked up at me, her eyes pleading, searching for a denial, for a way to make it all disappear. "It's real, Clara," I said, my voice low and firm. "Every word of it. I've spent weeks, months putting this together. This is who Liam really is." A single tear tracked a path down her cheek, followed by another and another. The mask shattered, revealing the profound hurt beneath. "Why?" she choked out. Why would anyone do this?" "Because he's a predator, Clara," I explained. "He targets women like you, kind, trusting, successful. He charms them, isolates them, then slowly, systematically, takes everything." I saw the flicker of recognition in her eyes, the dawning understanding of the subtle ways he had begun to control her, to chip away at her independence. The air in the kitchen grew heavy with her silent anguish. She reread parts of Sarah's story, her fingers tracing the words as if trying to physically grasp the truth. I watched her, my own heart aching, knowing this was tearing her apart, but also knowing it was necessary. This was the only way to save her. Suddenly, a key turned in the lock. My blood ran cold. Liam. He wasn't supposed to be back for hours. Clara's head snapped up, her eyes wide with panic. The evidence lay scattered on the table between us. There was no time to hide it, no time to prepare. The front door opened, and Liam's voice, smooth and falsely cheerful, echoed through the house. "Honey, I'm home! Surprise!" He walked into the kitchen, his smile faltering as he took in the scene. Clara, tear-streaked and pale, me sitting opposite her, and the damning papers strewn across the table. His eyes narrowed, a cold, predatory glint replacing the false warmth. His gaze landed on the articles, then on Sarah's name. The air crackled with a sudden dangerous energy. "What is this?" he demanded, his voice hardening, the charm completely gone. His eyes darted between Clara and me, a silent threat passing between us. Clara flinched, instinctively pulling back. "It's the truth, Liam," I stated, pushing myself to my feet, my voice unwavering despite the tremor in my hands. "The truth about you." His face contorted, a mask of rage replacing his earlier composure. He lunged for the papers, his hands sweeping across the table, scattering them to the floor. "You interfering little bastard!" he snarled, his eyes blazing. He turned on Clara, his voice dripping with venom. "And you believe this garbage? After everything we have? After everything I've done for you?" Clara, however, wasn't the same woman she had been moments before. The shock, the betrayal had hardened something within her. She met his furious gaze, her own eyes now clear, devoid of the fear that had shadowed them for so long. "It's not garbage, Liam," she said, her voice surprisingly strong. "It's your history. And I'm not going to be another one of your victims." Liam took a step towards her, his hand raised, a chilling precursor of violence. Before he could reach her, I stepped between them. "Don't you dare touch her," I warned, my voice low and fierce. This was it, the confrontation I had both dreaded and prepared for, the battle for Clara's future. My defiant stance shattered the illusion of control Liam had so carefully constructed. His eyes, usually so calculating, widened with a flash of genuine surprise, then narrowed into a predatory glare. He lunged, not at Clara, but at me, a wordless snarl ripping from his throat. The next few moments dissolved into a chaotic blur of adrenaline and instinct. I braced myself, years of suppressed anger and resentment fueling my response. He was bigger, stronger, but I had the element of surprise and a lifetime of watching him chip away at my sister's spirit. We grappled, furniture scraping across the hardwood floor as we crashed against it. A lamp toppled, shattering with a deafening crack that echoed through the small bungalow. I felt the sharp sting of his fist connecting with my jaw, the metallic taste of blood filling my mouth. But I held on, a desperate, primal urge to protect Clara overriding the pain. My grip on his shirt tightened, and I twisted, using his momentum against him, sending him stumbling backward into the wall. He hit it with a sickening thud, momentarily stunned. In that brief window, Clara, who had been frozen in shock, sprang into action. She grabbed a heavy antique vase from a nearby table, a wedding gift from our grandmother, ironically, and swung it with surprising force. It connected with Liam's head with a dull thwack, and he crumpled to the floor unconscious. The vase, miraculously, remained intact. The silence that followed was deafening, broken only by our ragged breathing and the frantic pounding of my heart. We stood there, staring at Liam's inert form, a strange mix of fear, relief, and a profound sense of finality washing over us. The battle was over. The immediate threat was neutralized, but the aftermath, the true reckoning, had just begun. Clara dropped the vase, her hands trembling as she sank to her knees beside him, not out of concern, but as if the weight of the past few years had finally become too much to bear. Her eyes, no longer clouded by fear or denial, were now clear, filled with a raw, unadulterated grief for the life she almost had, and the parts of herself she had lost. I knelt beside her, pulling her into a tight embrace. She wept then, not the quiet, controlled tears I had grown accustomed to, but deep, gut-wrenching sobs that shook her entire body. It was the sound of a dam breaking, of years of pain and suppression finally being released. I held her, stroking her hair, whispering reassurances, letting her purge the poison that had festered inside her for so long. This was not just about Liam, it was about the betrayal she felt, the shame, the fear that had consumed her. When her sobs finally subsided, she pulled back, her eyes red-rimmed but resolute. "Elias," she began, her voice hoarse, "I need to call the police." There was no hesitation, no wavering. The woman who had once been so terrified of Liam, so convinced she had to protect his image, was gone. In her place was a survivor, a fighter who was finally ready to reclaim her life. The next few hours were a blur of flashing lights, police interviews, and the cold, sterile air of a hospital where I had my jaw checked. Liam, it turned out, had a history of domestic violence, a pattern of behavior that had been carefully hidden behind his polished facade. The police found evidence of his previous offenses, corroborating Clara's account and solidifying the charges against him. The shocking revelation was that he had been wanted in another state for similar assaults. He was arrested, and the charges against him were severe. The legal proceedings were long and arduous, a painful rehashing of Clara's trauma. But this time, she faced it head-on, her voice steady, her gaze unwavering. She testified, not just for herself, but for every woman Liam had ever hurt. Her courage was awe-inspiring. I stood by her side through every step, a silent promise to never let her face anything alone again. The community, once so quick to judge, rallied around her, offering support and solidarity. The small-town gossip that had once plagued us was replaced by genuine concern and admiration for her strength. Liam was eventually convicted and sentenced to a lengthy prison term. Justice, though slow and hard-won, was served. The closure was bittersweet, as most true closures are. Clara had lost years of her life, her innocence, and a piece of her former self. But in the ashes of that destruction, something new and stronger had emerged. She enrolled in college, pursuing a degree in social work, determined to help others escape the very traps she had fallen into. She became an advocate, a voice for the voiceless, transforming her pain into purpose. Our relationship, once strained by her secret, was now stronger than ever. We had faced the darkness together and emerged on the other side, bound by a shared trauma and an unbreakable bond. The scars remained, a testament to what we had endured, but they were no longer wounds. They were reminders of our resilience, of the power of truth, and of the enduring strength of family. Clara had finally found her freedom, not in a grand escape, but in the quiet, courageous act of speaking her truth and reclaiming her life, one brave step at a time. The silence in the courtroom was deafening, a thick blanket woven from anticipation and dread. Every eye in that room, from the stern-faced judge to the hushed spectators, was fixed on me. My heart hammered a frantic rhythm against my ribs, a drum solo of terror and a strange cold satisfaction. This was it, the culmination of months of sleepless nights, relentless digging, and a burning, all-consuming obsession. This was the moment I had fought for, the justice I had craved. My sister, Sarah, sat across the aisle, her face a mask of carefully constructed indifference. The woman who had once been my confidant, my protector, now looked like a stranger. The betrayal still stung, a raw wound that refused to heal, even after everything. Her fiancé, Mark, the man whose actions had set this entire nightmare in motion, shifted uncomfortably beside her. His arrogance, once so intimidating, now seemed to shrink under the weight of the evidence I had meticulously gathered. The prosecutor's voice, sharp and clear, cut through the tension. He laid out the final pieces of the puzzle, each one a testament to Mark's calculated cruelty and Sarah's complicity. He spoke of the doctored documents, the fabricated alibis, the way they had both conspired to not only abandon me in my darkest hour, but to actively sabotage any chance I had at recovery. I remembered the nights I had spent crying into my pillow, the desperate calls to Sarah that went unanswered, the crushing realization that the one person I thought would always stand by me had chosen a monster over her own flesh and blood. That resentment had festered, growing into a relentless drive for truth. Then came the moment of truth. The final twist I had been waiting for. The prosecutor introduced the last piece of evidence, a series of encrypted messages, recovered from a burner phone Mark had foolishly thought untraceable. These messages didn't just confirm his guilt, they revealed a deeper, more sinister plot. He hadn't just attacked me, he had been systematically preying on vulnerable women, using Sarah's connections to find his victims. And Sarah, my sister, had known. She had not only covered for him, but had actively participated in silencing one of his previous victims, a young woman who had disappeared months before. A gasp rippled through the courtroom. Sarah's carefully constructed composure shattered. Her eyes, wide with panic, darted to Mark, then to me. In that instant, I saw it. Not just fear, but a flicker of the old Sarah, the one who understood right from wrong, the one who would have fought for me. But it was too late. The damage was done. The choice is made. The judge's gavel struck, a sound that echoed like a final judgment. Mark was found guilty on all counts, his sentence swift and severe. Sarah, implicated in the cover-up and obstruction of justice, received a lesser but still substantial sentence. As they were led away, their faces etched with despair, I felt a strange mix of emotions. There was no triumphant cheer, no surge of pure joy. Instead, a profound exhaustion settled over me, a weariness that went bone deep. Walking out of that courthouse, the sunlight felt different. The air smelled cleaner. The world, for the first time in what felt like an eternity, didn't feel like a suffocating cage. I had achieved what I set out to do. I had sought justice, not just for myself, but for the other women Mark had harmed, and for the truth that Sarah had tried to bury. But the victory felt bittersweet. The cost had been immense. The loss of my sister, the shattering of my innocence, the arduous journey through a legal system that often felt insurmountable. I had grown, though. The broken girl who had been abandoned was gone. In her place stood a woman forged in fire, resilient and strong. I had learned that true strength wasn't about avoiding pain, but about facing it head-on, even when it meant tearing down everything you once held dear. The path to healing would be long, but for the first time in a very long time, I felt like I could finally breathe. The obsession had lifted, replaced by a quiet, earned peace. The chapter was closed, and I was ready to start writing my own future, free from the shadows of their betrayal.